Hi, it's my great pleasure today to introduce the speaker for our next research-based talk, Dr. Wendelin Hume. She's an educator and a researcher at the University of North Dakota, where she's been for the last 33 years after completing her undergraduate degree at Black Hills State University in Spearfish, South Dakota, and her graduate education in criminal justice and criminology at South Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. Based in part on her experiences growing up as an enrolled member of the Kemagwaning Nation and Anishinaabe Reservation in Northwestern Ontario, and her work on the criminal justice field. Her academic research include tribal justice, restorative justice, and the impact of traumatic brain injury on justice-involved individuals, and victim issues ranging from intimate partner violence to elder justice. Her personal interests center around her family, her ranch, and contributing time and energy to her community and our undergraduate and graduate students. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Hume.
Thank you. I'm trying to get a chance to share my slides here. Larger. All right, are the slides showing up?
You bet. Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I've been able to catch some of the speakers today, and I'm hoping to add to this ongoing discussion, right? Looking at some of that overlap between interpersonal violence, brain injury, but adding to it also a bit more of a cultural perspective, right? So, and then trying to also discuss a little bit of maybe some ways forward so that we can improve both the understanding, but also the healing that would take place. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. As she said, I'm Dr. Wendelin Hume. I'm at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, North Dakota. My home department and background is really criminal justice and victim issues. And I'm also an affiliate with the Women and Gender Studies program. Some of the work that I do is funded through grants. So what I'm talking to you about today isn't particularly any of these grant projects, but some of the resources are on the website, that kind of thing. It's hard to say where funding helped and where some of it didn't. So I'll just do the disclaimer. This is on me. It's not on anybody else, right? I also, since I am presenting from Grand Forks, North Dakota, would like to share a little bit of a land acknowledgement. Being here at the University of North Dakota, the university rests on the ancestral lands of the Pembina and Red Lake bands of the Ojibwe and the Dakota Oyate, which are presently existing as composite parts of the Red Lake, Turtle Mountain, and White Earth bands, and the Dakota tribes of both Minnesota and North Dakota. The official statement from the university is that we acknowledge the people who resided here for generations and recognize that the spirit of the Ojibwe and Oyate people permeates this land. As a university community, we will continue to build upon our relationships with the First Nations of the state of North Dakota, which are the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate Nation, the Spirit Lake Nation, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. I myself would like to also share a few thank yous as we get started. It is typical when presenting to a primarily Indigenous audience to always start with the thank yous, right? So here's a word, miigwech, in Anishinaabe, my original language. It means thank you, right? So I'd like to give a thank you and acknowledgement of the space that I am in, that I am presenting from, as well as a thank you for this space, this digital space that we are all sharing here today. I also want to send out a thank you to the ancestors generally, and to the Creator and spirits in particular. I also wanted to give a thank you to the organizers and sponsors of this conference, and especially to all the participants. We heard just a couple presenters ago the importance of listening, right? I think we've heard that a couple times. And listening is like the greatest show of respect. And so I really want to say thank you to those that are here. Without you here to engage and learn, what would be the point of us talking, right? So thank you for being here. And of course, I want to present a big miigwech to my family, without whom I wouldn't be here. As a result of today's presentation, I hope that each of you will be able to walk away with a couple of key concepts. One of those being cultural safety, cultural humility, that will also be able to identify a couple of key historical and systemic factors that I think create problems and make worse the health disparities that we see with many Native Americans. That you would be able to identify some cultural considerations that you could then apply if you are trying to provide a culturally sensitive approach to whatever it is that you do: prevention, intervention, healing, research, any of those things, right? And that you would be able to apply these strategies then in guiding and building some mutually beneficial relationships, relationships that honor both sovereignty and culture of Indigenous people, and hopefully recount some strategies that foster resilience and recovery of tribal members. I think sometimes when we talk about tribal members and tribal communities, research and other work is quick to point out some of the difficulties and the weaknesses. I want to be sure we walk away also being able to recount the strengths and some of the beautiful parts of Indigenous culture. I should probably position myself a little bit before we go too much further. Some of it you heard in my wonderful introduction. Again, thank you for that. I'm going to see, hopefully my links work. If not, I'll have to jump back and forth for my slides. I was born in the United States, but I was raised in Canada. So here we have a picture of the Sioux Narrows Bridge from boat level. So you're on the water, looking up at the bridge with the sunset in the background. I just like this image, and it's from my local area. And so I grew up on the Nato Game Reserve there up in Canada. I myself have a history of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, a difficult life, both before my experience in Canada as well as while I was there. I also briefly was in boarding school, and I'm sure you've heard some not good stories about some of those boarding school experiences. I would say yes, that's true. And also personal assault almost became one of those missing and murdered Indigenous women statistics, but fortunately I survived, let's put it that way. And I think I did have another picture, yeah, before we go forward. Here is another one. It's Berry Creek up on Lake of the Woods where I grew up. It was a favorite place of mine, the woods, a nice, safe, quiet place. As you heard mentioned, my family did move from Canada back to the United States. I grew up and left home as soon as I was able. I got married at a very young age, had children of my own, but decided I really wanted more education to understand the world around me. I did go to Black Hills State, which is in beautiful Spearfish, South Dakota. There's one of the pictures of the waterfalls up in the Great Black Hills, which are around the Spearfish area. And here's another image during winter, but still a beautiful area, even with the white stuff all around. I did manage to earn my bachelor's degree. I also worked in criminal justice in the area of probation and parole. And I had some policy recommendations how to improve the CJ system and their interaction with Indigenous people, who I was typically assigned to, but no one would listen to me. I had policy recommendations. I wrote little white papers like, here, can we change some things? But no one would listen. My advisor at college said, you know, if you want people to listen, you need all that stuff at the end of your name. And I'm going like, what stuff? She's gone that whole alphabet soup, and a BS just won't cut it. So I did go on to earn the MA, the PhD, the whole alphabet soup after my name in a hope to do research to try to influence policy and make things better for Indigenous people. I did my graduate work at Sam Houston State in Huntsville, Texas, home of the prison rodeo, Sparky the electric chair, and a variety of other things, but a very interesting place to study if you want to learn about both injustice and justice. And then when I was done, time to go back to work, I decided I wanted to work in an academic setting where I could both teach and do research. And I found my home up close to the Canadian border here at the University of North Dakota. And I think I have a picture that's outside one of our office buildings with a bunch of students out front on the steps. So a very wonderful place to research and learn, right? I do want to segue into learning more about domestic violence and brain injury in Native Americans with my own personal experience. While here at UND, I was just a couple years. I was still very young, just having worked here for a few years. And I had, all of a sudden, I was at a Girl Scout cookie training of all places, and I had the worst headache. I never got headaches, but it was like the worst. I had to run to the bathroom. I was throwing up. I knew something was just horribly wrong. I called my family to take me up to the ER right away. Wasn't sure what was going on, but there was something, right? It took 5 days going back and forth to the ER, to the neurologist, kind of like some of the other survivor stories, right? Getting dismissed, telling people, they were telling me, oh, it's probably just because you're a woman, it's about time for your period. I was even accused of seeking drugs. I was told, why don't you go see somebody at Indian Health Services? Why are you here? The local hospital? And it's like, I work in this community. I have health insurance. I don't have to go to Indian Health Services. I have a right to be seen here. I was actually in the neurologist's office when he told me, I'm putting a note in your report that I think you're just seeking drugs, and I will refuse to see you ever again. I went out to the van to wait. I told my husband, finish paying the bill, meet me in the car. You're going to have to drive me up to the emergency room. There's something seriously wrong. It was while I waited in our van for my husband to drive me to the ER that what had been an aneurysm ruptured. And I've been hemiplegic ever since. I wasn't making it. So with that, let's get by this, get back to our next slide. On a happier note, I did survive. It was a long road of recovery and care. But because of that, any chance I get to talk about justice issues and brain injury and working with Indigenous people, I'm just honored that I was invited to present, and I'm very happy to be here. I do some research, mainly not around brain injury, mainly around Indigenous justice and abuse. So elder abuse, interpersonal violence, drug issues, maternal drug issues, lots of things around Indigenous research. And I too, people have been sharing resources. Let me share mine. It's nijii.org, so NIJII.org, stands for National Indigenous Justice Information and Inclusion. And we chose that because it's based off the Anishinaabe word Niji, which means friend. We just took one word out because we don't want to misappropriate an entire word, but we do want to be a friend. It's an entire team of researchers. I think we've heard that too. It's not just me, it's an entire team, right? We use our backgrounds and our knowledge. Some of us are practitioners, some of us are educators, some of us are researchers. We try to work together to use our positions in the field, in academia, in whatever, to assist Indigenous peoples to improve responses to their self-identified needs. Our mission statement or vision statement includes the words respect, honor, dignity, and inclusion. We envision a world where Indigenous cultures and people are respected, we treat each other honorably from an early age, and we grow old together with dignity. We believe we can achieve that vision by gathering Indigenous justice information that can be used to improve policies and programs to assist Indigenous people of all ages while we collaboratively work together in the spirit of inclusion. And of course, that work is not nearly as successful when you do it alone as when you have allies by your side. Allies, like maybe some of the people that you've met at this conference today, right? And that's referred to as, well, it's advocacy when you're promoting the interest or causes of someone or a group of people that you believe in. And it's self-advocacy when you speak up for yourself and your needs, your interests, your desires, your rights, right? But I think all of that is made stronger when we add that allyship, right? Having people stand beside you, with you, speaking out for change, speaking out for services, speaking out for policies on your behalf along with you. And even systems advocacy, which is done by individuals or organizations, research groups, and others that are working to change policies, laws, or rules that may be unfairly impacting that group that you are concerned with. I wanted to have this slide because I was worried in coming to present. Sometimes when you talk about cultural aspects and background, people don't want to listen. They're really not open to that. And so it's important to take a moment and create a space that is safe. I'm just going to present this slide as something that you can use in other venues because I've found for the sessions I was able to attend today, this seems to be a very safe and respectful space, and I really appreciate that. But if you find yourself in a different venue, you can certainly ask for a space that will be free from racism, free from discrimination, and not just free from those things, but an actual acknowledgement or recognition that in many of the things we do, whether it's that you are impacted by a brain injury, it might be your cultural background, might be your income difference, it might be whether you have alphabet soup after your name or not, that there are these types of potential power imbalances. And with Indigenous people, we also bring historical and contemporary imbalances into that conversation. And to be aware of that, to go beyond just being sensitive, like, yeah, I know that's there, or I've heard of that, or I once took a training, but to actually try to engage. Like our last presenter who talked about being trauma informed, to not just know that word, but to really ask yourself, how can I try to be better at engaging the people I'm trying to work with, seeing things from their vantage point, embracing the strengths, for instance, of Indigenous culture, recognizing how these types of things impact Indigenous culture. How can we work with them rather than blame them? How can we help rather than judge, right? To understand our own biases and try to work past those so we can better treat and interact with others. I wanted to share this quick little map with you to kind of show which states have the highest percentage according to the population of both American Indians and Alaska Natives, so Indigenous people. But you'll notice that we have the light color blue. It may be a small percentage, less than 1% in other states across the nation. Because I often hear people, especially from like East Coast states and elsewhere, oh, we don't have a reservation in our state. There's no tribal people. And that's a misunderstanding. Whether you have a reservation or not, whether you have a high percentage of Indigenous people or not, there are many urban Indians, right? We live in the cities. We're all around you. We're going to the institutions. We're sitting there in the doctor's office. We are seeking services. We are perhaps abused in our relationships. We are traumatized with our head injuries. You don't necessarily need to have a reservation community in your region to be interacting with Indigenous people. And I think that's something that is important to keep in mind. I also want to briefly mention that when interacting with Indigenous people, either offering services, whether it's in a shelter, at a doctor's office, whatever it may be, to understand the importance of the historical trauma that took place. Technically, historical trauma isn't just trauma that happened in the past, get over it. No, we need to understand, right, that it's a trauma that has affected many generations of people. It's multi-generational trauma. It's usually experienced by a specific cultural, racial, or ethnic group. It was a major event that oppressed a particular group. You can see examples of those throughout history. I'm going to focus on Native Americans, and probably the biggest obvious trauma is the violent colonization that took place of Native Americans when people from other cultures came to North America. The violence that followed was so widespread that it resulted in the genocide of many unique tribes and cultures. Different languages, different customs, different spiritual beliefs. Not all Indigenous people are the same, right? We come from hundreds of different backgrounds, creating different tribes and cultures. Unfortunately, many of those unique tribes and cultures was wiped out with that colonization. For those that survived that experience, they faced removal from their homelands to other lands that were promised, then removal from those lands to other lands that were promised, and so on. Even once you landed on a reservation, there was an allotment process. So there's, businesses and other things in the midst of the reservation. It's not that the Indigenous people own all of that. That was followed by having children taken away, putting into boarding schools, which thus resulted in further a loss of culture, a loss of language, a loss of parenting skills, a loss of bonding with your parents and grandparents as you grew up in those schools. Even our spiritual practices were punished and outlawed for a very long time. It wasn't until exactly 100 years ago, in 1924, that Native Americans were even considered citizens. And these inequities continue, and they impact Indigenous health and well-being in numerous ways. And we need to understand that, because then when we add the impact of traumatic brain injury on top of that, it's yet another layer. But understand there's a lot of, just like we heard with domestic violence, there's a lot of additional things people are trying to deal with. There's a lot of additional things Indigenous people are trying to deal with. And then we add these other components of interpersonal violence and perhaps traumatic brain injury on top of that. We probably also need to understand the deep impact of socioeconomic status, which is just your social standing, right, of an individual or a group. We usually, when we research, we look at it as some combination of maybe educational attainment, income, type of occupation, ability to keep that occupation. But these variations in socioeconomic status have over time resulted in some really deep inequities in access to resources for Indigenous people, and other things related to privilege, power, and control. We know that the relationship between socioeconomic status, race, and ethnicity is intimately intertwined. But trying to understand that can help us improve our cultural sensitivity when we're working with Indigenous people, whether it's through our educational materials, through our practice, through our research efforts. Just a multi-layered set of hurdles that Indigenous people typically have to face. I did say I didn't want to just present you with the difficulties, with the downsides, but to also point out some of the strengths or resiliency of Indigenous culture. And I think one of the key cultural strengths of indigeneity is the emphasis on looking at things as a community. In the dominant culture, often there's really an emphasis on you, right? You, your title, your ability to earn, your standing, your position, your job, whatever it is, right? It's about you. Well, in Indigenous communities, traditionally, we are taught you, it's not that you're not important, but almost everything else is more important. Your family is more important. Your community is more important. The tribe is more important. You are a part of that bigger picture, but never just put yourself up on some kind of pedestal. Always be thinking, interacting, working, supporting that broader community around you. And I think in the long run, that really is a strength. We are open to networking. We seek out what services and other things are in the community because we like working with and engaging with that broader community. So I think when providers and others can build on that innate kind of strength and way of looking at the world, a lot of progress can be made. We also have been able to maintain, in most instances, a strong sense of cultural traditions and values, our willingness to listen, our willingness to engage with cultures outside of our own, our willingness to be proud of who we are and want to learn even more about that, and to stand up and help others like us. And I think, again, that ties back in with networking and working together on things is really a strength. And I think that is also seen by, in many tribal communities, there are a wide variety of community-based programs and initiatives that if outside providers are willing to look and listen and interact with those, we could form even broader, stronger networks because they are there. The pictures that I have at the bottom of my slide just represent, in a modern way, that idea of networking. It can take many forms. In the center is a picture of a traditional drum group representing culture. And the rightmost image is actually of some of my students who won a competition because they wanted others to learn about Indigenous culture. And they put together an online free educational module about Indigenous culture. And they won a competition and a free trip to Washington, D.C. For some of them, it's the first time they'd ever left the state, let alone to go to Washington, D.C. to present about their project. Here's a slide. It's in the slides I shared with the conference organizers, so I'm sure you have access to that, about how we tend to look at the world a little bit different than maybe Western dominant culture, which kind of ties in with what I just shared. The one thing that I would point out from this slide that I think is relevant to thinking about interpersonal violence, brain injury, and Indigenous people is that notion of looking at spirituality. We need to honor and respect that spirituality in order to really engage with Indigenous people. If you are reaching out to Indigenous people, in addition to respecting that resiliency, I would encourage you, try to make introductions, give people time to learn to know who you are and trust you. Listen a lot. It is a form of respect, right? And I like this quote. Often people think we're a culture that needs rescuing. We are not. We're a people who are very resilient, very strong. We want to be partners in creating systems that are effective and matter. We don't want to be served. We want to be a part of building those structures. So in terms of traumatic brain injury and Indigenous people, I already went over the historical and cultural context. We also mentioned the socioeconomic factors, which can put Indigenous people at greater risk. From the CDC, they look at it in terms of incidence and prevalence rates and then outcomes. So I can tell you that American Indian, Alaska Native children and adults have higher rates of traumatic brain injury related hospitalizations and deaths than other racial or ethnic groups. Some of the factors that contribute to this higher rate include the three main things: are higher rates of motor vehicle crashes, higher rates of suicide, and difficulties in accessing appropriate health care. CDC also mentions that because of some of these socioeconomic barriers, right, the outcomes tend to be less than non-Hispanic white individuals because of the problems in accessing care and aftercare. So the three main factors which actually impact traumatic brain injury in Indigenous communities are motor vehicle crashes, substance use, and high rates of suicide. You'll notice that interpersonal violence isn't here, but I would suggest that interpersonal violence can be woven into some of these. Often when you're fleeing a violent situation, you are traumatized, you are upset. Many reservation communities are in further regions in rural areas. The only way you can get anywhere else is by jumping in your vehicle. In that state of mind, accidents happen. Substance use can also sometimes be high, especially in those types of abusive relationships and in Indigenous communities. Not all Indigenous communities, but some have higher rates of substance use. And the damage from too much drinking or drinking and then having violence thrust upon you, as we've heard, the hitting, the slapping, the choking, that can cause traumatic brain injury. And sometimes that depression that we see that leads to higher rates of suicide, I haven't seen studies on it yet, but I've always wondered myself if some of that isn't because as a symptom of traumatic brain injury, not just that you're sad as a result of the poor finances, you're sad because of the abusive relationship. Perhaps you're actually sad because you've already suffered a traumatic brain injury, which then leads to higher rates of suicide. As I mentioned previously, the CDC has said that, and this is even age adjusted, traumatic brain injury related deaths from 2000 to 2017, mainly motor vehicle crashes is the highest. And these are the leading cause of death for American Indian Alaska Native people. I did want to put a shout out to my state brain injury network, the North Dakota Brain Injury Network, or NDBIN, ndbin.org. They have a wonderful set of information, little pamphlets. Here's an example. What is depression? Some things to recognize and some places to go for services in the North Dakota area. But you may find some of these resources. They're available for free on the NDBID network. I would encourage you to check it out. So in terms of interpersonal violence, as we wrap it up for today, I did want to mention there's not a lot of data that's out there due to a number of factors. Some of it, as you know, is underreporting, but we also see racial or ethnic misclassification. If we want to look specifically at American Indian or Alaska Native, usually it's Black, Caucasian, you know, and they don't say all the different ethnic or minority groups, including American Indians. So the data is lacking. There's also problems with jurisdictional issues and data sharing between different organizations. We do know that there are higher rates of adverse childhood experiences among American Indian, and we know that ACEs and interpersonal violence goes together. So yes, there are higher rates among Indigenous people. We also know that those victims are at greater risk due to the repetitive injuries to the brain, being hit, being strangled, and so on. We know that those elevated risks, then we have the higher rates, the elevated risks, and the worse health outcomes because they're in rural areas oftentimes. So we know this is an area that should be studied, right? There's just not a lot of data that is out there. I would also add to that there's a lot we heard earlier about those that are incarcerated in prisons or jails being screened and showing high rates of traumatic brain injury. Well, look at this chart that shows, look at the yellow bar, both for prisons and jails. American Indians are overrepresented, given their proportion in the population, overrepresented in prisons and jails. This would be another indirect indicator that this is an important topic that we should be looking into further. So what could we do to lessen this adverse impact on Indigenous people? Creating better relationship skills, having influential adults and peers that can serve as good role models to non-violent relationships, creating protective environments for victims to go to, strengthening economic supports for families, and supporting the survivors to increase their safety and lessen their harm. I think also it would be helpful if we could address substance use through a variety of community programs, as we've heard multiple times today, increasing education, increasing awareness of the impact of brain injury, particularly in both domestic violence and I would argue child abuse cases as well. Improve the safety on roads and in homes, improve funding for access and care. I know these sound familiar, but those same things would be helpful in tribal communities as well. And perhaps moving forward, if we can focus a bit more on collaborative research and maybe even collaborative policy changes, I think that would be very beneficial. There are some resources that I have linked that I would recommend that you can access from my slides. And with that, I say thank you, Wado and Miigwech. And we may have a moment or two left for questions if there are any.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. Lisa, are you able to join? I know that you have some Wi-Fi issues at the moment.
Yeah, well, I can join by audio, but I can't turn my video back on. So, but thank you, Dr. Hume. That was really, really insightful. Very important information. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. And I'm just looking in the chat. I don't see any specific questions there either.
And just a note for the audience, all the links are being put into the chat so that you can access those incredible resources. Can I ask a question then?
Certainly.
Do you, I think Karen had one too. Do you have suggestions for how we can get into this space in a culturally informed way? How can we help as like researchers who may not be within the culture or communities?
Yeah, so I think, historically, there's been some really bad research done with Indigenous peoples. There's almost like a hesitance, like just stay away. So it is hard. It's hard to get in there. But I think a large part of it is introductions. If you can know someone or meet someone, a fellow researcher that can kind of vouch for you and give you that lead in, and be prepared, tribal people will ask you like 100 times, why are you doing this? Why? And you need to really have a heartfelt response. Why? It better not just be, well, there was a grant. I need some grant money. You're nearby, so why not? If really you're looking to help, you have expertise you could bring to bear. We're all about collaboration and welcoming people in. So just give us a little bit of time to develop those bonds of trust. But having someone do some of those introductions with and for you can speed up the process a lot.
There's a couple of questions in the Q&A now that I could ask. So the first person, Amber Armstrong, says, I live in one of those light blue states where I found it challenging to connect with tribal organizations. What is your advice to connect in an appropriate way?
Yeah, I would say thank you for that question. Start early, like before it's needed. Almost like don't wait till you have someone right in front of you needing services. You're going like, I will connect you, reach out to some of those community groups and be willing to spend some face time. If they're having a cultural dance, if they're having a fashion show, they're doing something, just say, do you mind if I attend? It has nothing to do with brain injury. It's not your usual routine, and I know we're all very busy. But make that effort to show up, and they get to know you and your face, and they'll talk to you and they'll feel you out, and then they'll go like, "Oh, you're actually a good person. That's cool." So the next time when you're going, "Hey, I've got a client, I'd really like to hook them up with someone, a mentor, or someone they could talk to from their culture. Do you have recommendations?" They know you mean it from the heart. You're a good person, and they're more likely to give you a response. But it'll take a little bit of face time over not important events for them to open up. But those groups are all around you, so just try to see where they are. Look in the newspaper, look at Facebook, and then kind of invite yourself. Like, do you mind if I just come and get to know the people that are there?
Great advice. I know that we're just about at the top of the hour. There was one other question, and it was about going over the medicine wheel that you shared on one of the slides.
Yeah, I didn't really have much time to go over it. It was about taking some aspects about how to create peace between government entities from an international perspective, like the UN, right? And then superimposing some of the cultural values around that to kind of show that I think you can take almost any idea, like this global phenomenon of peace, intersperse it or embed it with cultural values, and then we can understand what you're saying. It's like, oh, we agree with that. We do that ourselves. We appreciate that. And so I think we could take even a topic like traumatic brain injury, interpersonal violence, those types of things, and address it in a way that resonates with the culture. And then we're talking the same language.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I agree. So thank you so much, Dr. Hume. We are very, very grateful that you came here today and shared all of this incredible knowledge. I learned so much. So very, very grateful to you for doing that. And I think it's going to inform a lot of the work that we're doing. And so thank you.